Please, sir. Please, sorry, sir. I thought it was state management, but we are not going to do it again.
No, we talk about state management. Talk about state management, but we have to deal with this one first before we get to state management. Right?
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, so network programming with HTTP. This is most likely the apps will most likely be network applications. Apps that have to integrate backend and REST APIs. And so this is like the crux of most of it here. Network programming with HTTP. HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It's an application layer protocol built on top of TCP/IP. TCP/IP, like is transmission control protocol slash IP. IP has to mean IP address or something. Internet protocol, yes, internet protocol, right? So HTTP is an application layer protocol. Basically, it defines the protocol how your application can communicate with another application on the internet. Defines what protocol means is means of exchange. How do we communicate? What do I give you and you give me? And what do we say to each other for us to communicate? Computers have to know these things. So that's what HTTP is. If you come from a web background, web 2, let me just call it web actually. Web is mostly HTTP. When you enter a URL in your browser, most times the URL are prefixed with HTTPS colon slash www. Okay, so basically you're telling your browser to get me a web page at this location, and your browser uses the HTTP protocol to communicate with the servers wherever they are and gets you the web page. Okay, so HTTP is known to the web, but HTTP is not the web does not have a monopoly on HTTP, right? Mobile apps too can utilize the uh, protocol to communicate with servers. These days, the normal architecture is you have one REST API backend and that the web application uses and the mobile application uses equally. So mobile applications can also get HTTP resources and use HTTP. Okay, so I'll briefly explain the parts of a HTTP request. Okay, it's not in this slide. So a typical HTTP request has the HTTP headers and HTTP body. Okay. Headers are what kind of tries to configure how the request will proceed, how the protocol should behave. Headers are like metadata. Okay. With headers, you can specify what kind of application should you give me, or maybe how long should the connection leave, things like that. Okay, that's for HTTP headers. But the body is where you specify the data that is being exchanged. Maybe your application wants to send some data to a remote server. You don't put it in the header, put it in the body. Okay, so most times we use JSON, JavaScript object notation formats. I'm sure we are all familiar with JSON data. So we use it to transfer data over HTTP protocol. Okay, so that's the typical structure of HTTP request and response. You have the headers and you have the request body. Most times it's called payload. And I may be calling it payload. So whenever I say payload, just not talking about the HTTP body, not the header. Okay. So both are equally very, very, very important. And knowing how to use them, of course, will determine how knowledgeable you are as a developer. Okay, so we talk about the HTTP methods. The two most important ones, you can see I put the last ones inside order. I just bundled them together so that you can focus on the two most important ones. You have the get and the post method. So the get method is one of the most fundamental and widely used HTTP request methods. Basically, when you want to get some data from a remote resource, you use the HTTP GET method, okay? And the post method is used for sending data. You can see that it's very, very intuitive. The name GET, the name post. Okay, now these two methods are the most important because anything you can do with these two, you can do with the others, but it's always advised to use each for what they are meant for. Okay, but there's a very big distinction between get and post. Okay, the get method usually, typically, does not and should not have a request body because it is assumed that you are not sending any data over that connection. So when you're using the get HTTP method, you should not have a request body. Remember, I said the structure of HTTP request consists of a header and a body. Okay. Now, the get should not have a body. Okay, because it is assumed that it is not sending any information. It only wants to retrieve an information. Okay, that's for get. And post, typically, of course, like the name suggests, should have a request body. Okay, but any one of them can have headers. Okay, any one of them can have headers. Headers are like metadata. You know what metadata are, or sorry, what metadata is. Metadata is information about the data. Okay, so you have data and you have metadata. Okay, if you're familiar with languages like Python, okay, Python uses a lot of metadata programming, you know, to reduce boilerplates. So kind of annotate your classes and everything, and the runtime generates code from that. So that just explain what metadata is. So headers are where you add your metadata. Okay. So if you're a full stack developer and you build a backend, you can specify in the headers, the request headers, some custom headers that maybe you want your application to read, want the application to use and make some decisions. Custom headers that, of course, they are standard headers in the HTTP world, but you can specify your own custom headers. Okay, that will be only unique to you and your application. Only the servers and the clients will know about that when they are communicating. So that's about headers. Then you have body, payload, data, call it whichever you wish, but it's all the same thing, okay? So these are the two most important methods in HTTP. And of course, we have put patch and delete. Put patch are basically the same thing. They're used for updating. Post can be used for updating, but it's usually advised not to use post to update something. Post is usually for creating. Okay. When you're not updating something, usually you use a post, okay? But put and patch are for updating, but there's a distinction between them most times in their usage. Put is used for basically putting a data. If it's not already available, you put it there. But it is available, you update it. So that's what put does. Patch specifically just does updates. If it's not there, it does nothing. But patch just updates if it's there already. Okay, and also the last method is delete. Like the name suggests, used for deleting resources in your remote backend server application, whatever. Okay, so to briefly talk about the encoding methods before we see some examples in code, right? So encoding methods basically determine how the information you how the information you send over the network is encoded. It's naive to think that the information you send is going to be like the way you sent it over the network. The computer, sorry, the lower layers of networking, TCP IP, most times they kind of compress or or obfuscate, sometimes partially encrypt, kind of modify this data when they're in transit. Okay. So you can use this content type header parameter to specify how you want your data as it's transferred to be encoded. We have two important ones. Again, we have the JSON encoding method and you have the multi-path form data method. Now, these are the two most important ones, if I say so myself. Okay, the URL encoded form is mostly used in HTML, CSS, sorry, HTML web development. If you come from a HTML background, you know that when you have a form field, basically the form is submitted with content type of X to the form you are encoded. So that's by, but the two most important are JSON and multipath from data. And why they are important is, first of all, JSON. REST APIs, most REST APIs that you'll be encountering return JSON data and accept JSON data. Okay, so it only makes sense that JSON will be the most popular and the most widely used. Okay, I don't think I've seen or in a backend where they are returning something other than JSON data from a REST API. Okay, and REST APIs are the standard of backend these days. Okay, so that's why JSON data is very important, right? But JSON data has a limitation, and that limitation is that you cannot send binaries. By binaries, I mean files. Okay, so things like images, documents, maybe any type of file that is not textual data or something you cannot encode in a JSON. You can't send them through content type application slash JSON header. You can't send them like that. Okay. JSON data is mostly limited to textual data. You know the structure of a JSON format. So I'm assuming we all know that, right? You can only have strings, lists, um, true or false, Boolean values, numbers, and decimals in JSON. So that is where multi-part form data comes in. For instance, you want to upload an image, you have an application, you want to maybe upload images or profile pictures of your users, something. You can't send that image as JSON data. It has to be encoded in another form.
Please, am I the only one that is not hearing anything?
Okay, sorry about that. I had a slight network challenge. Where did you lose me, please? No, Ngozi.
Yeah, you were saying that data like binaries, that's images and what cannot be sent through the JSON format, and you're explaining using the what it is, the other data type, multi-part.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So let me please share my screen again and we continue. Okay, my screen should be up, right? Okay,
Yes,
so I was
please.
explaining. Okay, I was explaining that JSON is the most widely used, but it has limitations. Okay, uh, limitations are that you can't send binaries. By binaries, I mean files. Okay, files are binaries through JSON data encoding method. So that's where multi-part form data comes in. Okay, multi-platform data enables you to send both textual information and binaries. So basically, what you can do with JSON data, you can do it with multi-platform data, right? You may want to ask, why don't we ditch JSON and use multi-platform data? Of course, there are reasons for that. Okay, you can do your research, find out more about that. Okay. Because you're raising your hand, please go ahead.
Yes, I just want to quickly ask that. Is it that we can use these two simultaneously, or once a file, an image or whatever is involved, then we switch to the multi-part, or we can use both JSON and multi-part at the same time?
No. And that's a very, very wonderful question. Thank you for asking that. Okay, for each HTTP request you make, think of it like making a function call, but you call it a network call, right? For each request you make, that request has its own encoding method, which you would, okay. You can't use both. To answer your question, no, you can't use both in the same HTTP request. Okay, you can't use both. You may want to, what you may want to do instead is kind of parameterize the header that sets this content type. Maybe when it's an image you want to upload, you change it to multi-platform data. And of course, does that answer your question?
I don't know if it's my network, but I did not hear you complete. The last thing I heard was that
If you want
once
to
when you
upload
come to
text,
the image. Huh?
if you want to upload text, you
Yes,
use
that's the
multi-part.
last.
That was where I stopped too.
Okay. Sorry about that. What I'm trying to say is, for each HTTP request you make, you can only use one encoding. Okay, so you can't use both in one HTTP request. Okay, so in your code, you may want to switch to multi-platform data when you want to upload the binary, and maybe when you want to send the JSON data, things like text, numbers, decimals, Boolean values, use JSON data. And of course, the encoding that you would use in your client application as a mobile developer, you're building a client, you're not building, people in charge of building servers are the backend developers. So as a mobile developer, you have to respect the encoding that the backend uses. Okay, if a backend is requesting for multi-platform data, it can't send the JSON. If you do that, it's just gonna give you an error as expected. Okay, and this is a common mistake that most people do. And that's why there are backend documents, the REST API documentations. You have things like Swagger UI and Postman. Most times when you're working with a backend developer, they prepare this documentation and they provide it to you. This is where you see for each of the endpoints they give you. This is where you see what is the content type of this application. Of course, content type means encoding. So I might be interchanging between these two, but they mean basically the same thing. Content type means encoding. Okay, so in the documentation, you see the content types, and of course, you see the body schema. Okay, I've not talked about body schema, but I'll briefly talk about that before I move over to my VS Code. So I hope that answers your question, Gozi, and I hope you got that completely.
Yes, I got you. But I believe that when we start coding, we'll understand it better.
Okay. So that's about encoding methods, right? Yeah, so let me open up my VS Code quickly.
I thought you said you wanted to explain the schema of the content type schema before you open your VS Code.
Gozi, nothing flies by you. Nothing passes you by. Okay, okay. I wanted to actually do the explanation while I was showing examples so that I can better understand it because there's no slide for it here, and it's better explained with examples, okay?
Okay, sir. No problem, sir. I will still get it in the long run.
Okay, David, you say you are struggling with your network. Well, I know how that can be, how frustrating can be. Maybe try leaving the call and joining back, or try changing your location. Okay, my VS Code should be up now, right? Please confirm.
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Okay. So for the sake of this class and time, I've prepared some examples. Prepare some examples before time. Okay. So looking at those examples. No. Annoying messages. Okay. So basically in that and Flutter, which you'd see as we progress, there are two main packages for networking. Uh, two main packages that we'll be using. Okay, and they are HTTP and the second one is DO. First one is HTTP, second one is DO. Okay. There are many other packages. If you go to pub.dev, you see many other packages, and maybe you want some lower level functionality that HTTP or DO does not offer you. You could even use I think that has a native package in that.io that you can use, right? But of course, the thing with abstraction and higher level things is that it lets you other things rather than fiddling and working with lower level things. So two packages, HTTP and DO. HTTP is very, very basic. Well, let me not say very, very basic, but it's the one programming because it's network programming rather. Because it's just easy like that. We have the HTTP.get, HTTP.post and everything. DO is slightly DO is actually simple too, but it offers you much, much more features. Okay. Uh Things like request cancellation, things like tracking the updates of an upload. For instance, you're uploading a document, you can add a closure that tracks the updates, showing you how many bytes have gone, how many bytes are still remaining. These are things that DO does for you. Of course, you can always check out the documentation on pub.dev for these things, right? So for our first HTTP method, we have fetch product. This is a dummy URL. Call it the dummy endpoint. It just gives us some data that we print out to the console. So here, see what happens here, right? I'm using the HTTP package. I imported it here. Okay. You can see where I imported it. I'm highlighting it now. This HTTP package has methods that correspond to the HTTP method that I discussed previously. It has get, it has post, and it has patch, put, and delete. Okay. So this first example that we'll be seeing, sorry, not this one. Let me comment on this one quick. This first example that I'm highlighting, right? So let me quickly explain what's happening if I run the code. So here we have our endpoint. An endpoint is your URL where the resource is located. And of course, it has to be prefixed with HTTPS. Okay, because they're using the HTTP protocol. The URL has to be prefixed with HTTPS. Okay. HTTP to be precise, but S means is. I'm sure we are familiar with that. Okay. So you pass the URI to the HTTP method you want to call. That's where I do that here. Okay. So this is going to do whatever it does, do all the magic it does under the layer, package your packets, use the TCP IP, send it over the network, get a response and everything. But what you just care about is this point where you call it. This is what you care about. Now, depending on how the backend is programmed or how the server that offers this endpoint is programmed, it's going to give you the data response body. Let me take that back. It's going to give you a response. Okay. Remember when I explained the structure of HTTP request? Say a REST request has headers and it has body. Okay. It's going to give you a response. A response is just like a request. It has headers and it has body. Okay. So you can see where I assign the response to a variable response. So now this response contains status code. Okay, I didn't mention status code in HTTP. Who knows what status codes are? Please just tell us quickly. Okay, no one is raising their hand. So let me quickly explain what status codes are. Status codes are,
Hello, sir.
sorry,
Did you please? I didn't get what you said though. What did you ask, please?
I said who knows what status codes are in HTTP? Briefly tell us. Do you?
Okay, status codes are like the, should I say, the current state, something like that, of your request. Like maybe like the 200 is success, the 404 is maybe bad gateway, something like that. Like the status of your request, what you are requesting for, if it's successful, if it's not successful, if it's a bad gateway, if maybe the thing is invalid. There are different status codes to tell you the response of your request, the status of them.
Okay.
So that's what I mean.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ginika. Uh, I'm sure we heard that, right? Status codes tell you the status of your response. Each of those codes have a meaning, right? I think the range 200 or 100 to I think 500 or 600. But of course, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to know all of them. You only need a few. Okay, and I'll be listing out those few now. First one is 200, which is the most important. Second one is 201. Another one is 401, 400, and 404. So I don't know if you've tried visiting a site and you get a 404. I think that's the most popular, even among non-tech people. Yes, because it's giving me a thumbs up. So 404 means the resource was not found. Okay. So 400 means bad requests. 401 means unauthorized. For instance, when you're calling a protected endpoint, an endpoint that you're supposed to provide with an authorization header. I will explain what authorization header means later, not in this class. You're supposed to give it something that identifies you to the server, maybe a JWT token, and you don't provide it. If the server is programmed well, you're supposed to get a 401 unauthorized. Well, it's unfortunate, it's sad that most backend developers they don't stick to the status codes. They'll be providing you 201 where you're supposed to get 200 and everything. So this is something, working with somebody, backend developer, you guys need to discuss this. Tell them, give me my correct status code. Okay, because these things can lead to errors in your programs, in your applications. So that's what status code are. Status code is rather. So you can see in this example, right? This HTTP.get calls this endpoint. Okay. And it gives me a response, and assign that response to a variable called response. Okay. You can see that response has a field called status code, and I'm checking if status code is equal to 200. Why am I doing that? The reason I'm doing that is because I know beforehand that if everything goes well, the status code should be 200. If for any reason the status code is not 200, that means that this call to http.get was not successful and there was an error, and therefore the data I'm hoping to get from it is not available. So you can see that so with what I explained just now, you can see that if I remove this call so that checks if the status code is 200, I'll get all sorts of errors in my program. This is bad practice. So take notes, guys. This is very, very bad practice. You don't check the status code of your response and you try to pass the data that you get my endpoint, you get errors that will shock you. Things like type error, map string is not a subtype or no, things that will just leave you frustrated if you're new, if you're not really experienced. So always check the status code of your responses before you proceed. So because I know that this thing is supposed to give me a status code of response, and if it doesn't, sorry, status code of 200, and if it doesn't give me 200, I know something must have gone wrong. Data is not available. That is why I'm doing this. You can see now that I said else. Else means if status code is any other thing apart from 200, print HTTP request failed status. But most likely what you want to do here is throw an exception rather than print, okay? Because you're not using print in Flutter applications. What you would want to do here is throw, maybe say requests on successful is what you do. So if for any reason the status is not 200, you're gonna this whole function is gonna throw an error which you're going to catch somewhere where you're calling it. For instance, you're calling it in function. So if you wrap this in a try catch block, you're gonna catch that. And of course, it is always good practice to catch your exceptions. So let's quickly run this code. Let's see what it does. I see some people joined us who joined us very late. When the class is recorded, I will be uploaded. So we'll always try to join your classes on time. Okay, because there's some things I would say in the beginning I will not record. Okay. So I'm going to run this code quickly. First of all, change my directory into where the file is located. So the file is http.dat. Okay. So please confirm if you can see my screen, anyone.
Yes, we can see.
So you can see this whole mumbo jumbo that was printed out to my terminal. Now this is the data I got from by calling that endpoint. Okay. So this is the data I got from calling the endpoint. You can see in the code here, I have Ngozi, I'm coming to your body schema now. So basically what this block does is it parses a response. It extracts the products and it prints it the console. Okay. Note the order: parse, extract, and use. Okay. Parse, extract, and use. If always let me find a better way to use it so you remember it very well. Parse, extract, and use. You must first parse before you extract, before you use the data. Okay, the first thing here is JSON decode. JSON decode is what does the parsing for us. So this response body itself, as it is not ready for us to be used. Okay, it is still in a very, very raw byte format. You know, everything in computers are bytes. Okay, so it's in a very raw byte format. Most times, UTF encoded strings or ASCII encoded strings. So you need to parse it. Okay, so here that we parse it, it gives us data. Now, data is let's print the data type of data. Okay, to see what it is parsed to. Okay, so let's quickly run this code again. First of all, to demonstrate, okay, we would print the data type of data of the response body rather before we start, before passing, and then we print it again after passing to demonstrate the difference. Okay, wonderful. So you can see it printed string here and it printed map string to dynamic. That means that before the data was passed, the data was still a string. That means this whole thing was just one long encoded string. This whole thing that printed it was just inside one long encoded string. We don't want that. Okay, we want maps, we want lists, we want Dart data structures that
Sorry,
we
sir,
can use
you
in
are
our
breaking. No, I'm busy only me. Some words you are
Sorry.
saying are just breaking out. I don't know if it's from my end too.
Sorry, can anyone else hear me? Is it?
Yeah, you're not breaking. Can hear you.
Sorry. So one person at a time, please. Can anyone else hear me clearly?
I can hear you clearly, sir.
Okay, Ngozi, can you hear me?
I can hear you actually, but just that some of your words are just breaking out.
I can hear you. I hear you.
And whenever it breaks out, I just don't understand the whole thing again.
Okay, that's fine. Tell me, where did you lose me? Okay, I need everyone to carry that along. Where did you lose me?
So when you were trying to tell us, okay, so when you were trying to explain to us that the runtime type that you were like trying to explain the lines of code there in the request body, that's where the
Okay.
code works.
Okay. So I was explaining that. Let me go back a bit. Okay. I think you still have some time. When you get network from when you get data or a resource from a server or a connection, whatever, with HTTP protocol, you must parse first, extract. Okay, because this is a common avenue for error. When you forget to parse your data and you're extracting it, you're extracting unparsed data. Okay, you run into all kinds of errors. Okay, and this is a common challenge for people that are not familiar with HTTP protocol. Okay, so I was explaining that in this example, we have the response body, which is as response.body. Okay, this data is still very, very raw. Okay, we can't use it or convert it to data structures or models in our application. We need to first of all parse it, then before extracting. When you now extract, you can now return it or use it anyhow you want to use it. Okay, first of all, parse and extract. So I put the print statement here to demonstrate what the data type is before parsing and what data type is after parsing. You can see I parse it with JSON.decode code. Okay, so and when I run the code, this is what I got. Can you see where I am highlighting in my
Yes.
terminal?
So the body run type runtime type is string. That's that first thing before
Okay,
passing.
good. Okay, so what that thing means is that before passing, this whole data that we printed now on the code, so this whole data that we wanted to get was a string, and strings are useful, but for our use cases, maybe we don't really mean this as a string. We need it as a data model, okay? And to explain the body schema that I said I was going to explain. Now, I'm going to look at this data carefully. You can see that it has a structure. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, you can see it has a structure. It has ID, title, description, yada 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 yada, and all. I'm sorry, this is not well formatted, but it should be. Let me check if I. So you can see it has a structure, a specific structure. No matter the number of times I run this thing, it's always data with this structure. Maybe the title may change. The title may become something else, right? But the structure remains the same. And this is what JSON is. Let me copy this. But if I copy this now, this is not JSON actually, this is a map. Okay. So you can see here where I printed the data, I printed the first, if this product is a list, okay? Index a list. To index a list, you use numbers. So products in index braces 0 means print the first item in the list. So this thing that was just printed is the first item in the list. Okay, but let us print the whole list. You know what? Let's do this instead. Let's see if we can format it. Format it before it gets printed so we can better understand. So this is a utility for formatting JSONs. And let's quickly run this code again. Okay, beautiful. You see my terminal? Please confirm you can see my terminal.
Yes. I see your terminal.
Okay,
Oh, you
so that
printed the
means
whole
you can
product.
yes, the whole list,
Oh.
right? So you can see that the data is actually formatted now, so we can inspect the schema properly. I want to get to the top. Sorry about that, guys. I think because there's too much data, it's not letting me get to the top. So let's just do one for now. Okay, to still serve our purpose of inspecting. Okay, wonderful. So this is JSON data.
Much cleaner now. Yes, can see it.
Thank you very much. So the first item has an ID of 1, gives us this title, blah, blah, blah. The second item, the fields are not going to be the same, right? But the structure, the schema is going to be the same. It's going to have an ID, title, description, category, price, discount, percentage, rating, and all that. So this is what this schema looks like. Most times when you're integrating a REST API endpoint, if you go to the Postman documentation or the Swag, the structure of the data it gives you, the structure of the data it gives you is really, really important, and you can use it to build data models for your application. So for instance, now with me knowing that this is the structure of this body schema, I model for this structure. Maybe I just want the ID title and category. I can do something like this. Sorry, I have Copilot. Like a minute. So you can create a data model for this, and when you get the response, you just simply parse it into that data model. Okay. So while the Copilot creates my model for me, let's just yada 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 yada. Hmm. Hmm. Please confirm you can see my screen, everyone.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Please, sir, how are you doing this stuff now?
Just
How are
one
you editing this thing?
Talk about that later, okay? But let's just focus on the example I'm trying to show, okay? So I was explaining thing about body schemas, right? When you know the schema of the data given, you can build data models. This is a very, very common practice that you'll be using, okay? You can build data models that mirror that JSON data, okay? So that when the response comes, you just pass the data directly into your models. For instance, now, if I wanted to do that, I may just go to my fetch products, okay? And instead of having void, I wanted to return a list of products, okay? So here now, what I'm going to do is do products. Because I know product is a list. You can see my screen. This is what I'm doing here. Now, what this function now does is it calls this endpoint that gives us list of products. It gets the information and parses it into this data model we've created. Okay. And it to give it to us. So when we call it inside main function, where is our main function? So we can say my list products. Okay. So this fetch products now gives you a list of products when you call it. You see? So this is a very, very common practice. For instance, if you are building an application, you may have a function that makes a network call and returns a list of products there. And each product may have maybe the name of the product, the ID of the product, the price of the product, just like this one has and everything. So and of course, we're passing that information and using it to do the rest of the application. Okay, so the reason I did this now, the reason let me re-emphasize again. The reason I built this data model is because I know the structure of the data returned to me. If you don't know this structure, you cannot build a data model. That is why documentations are very, very important. So if you're working with a backend developer, always be on their neck to provide you with good documentation so that you know the data and schema of everything you're calling. You because incorrect schema can lead to errors. For instance, it's expecting something else here and you give something else here. Your application will throw an error that might crash it in production, and that is not what we want now, right? So so that's the end of http.get method. So does anyone have a question for me at this point? Rosie, you have a question? Please raise your, please unmute and ask me a question.
So the example you've just given us is that of get now. We've not really looked at the post method, right?
Yes. I think that brings us to the end of http.get request.
Get. Oh, I thought I heard HTTP. Sorry, sir. No problem.
Okay, let me give you assignments now. Okay, go and find
Sir,
find
no,
a
no,
post
no,
request
no.
from.
I didn't know. That's not what I just
Wait,
asked an innocent
wait.
question.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Right. Give me a minute there. So we have http.get, use your data to do anything you want to do. So we also have another one called post, which I talked about earlier. Now you can see get, we didn't give it any we didn't give get any request body. Okay. The request itself, we didn't give it any body. Okay, you can see that in the method signature itself, look at this thing I'm highlighting currently right now. I think the method signature, there is no parameter for body. Okay, that's just to tell you that get doesn't accept bodies, shouldn't accept bodies. Okay, so but post accepts bodies, body data. Okay, so let's do a quick example. We might not run this example because the endpoint does not work. But just demonstrate it, right? Copy over this endpoint.
Sorry, sir. My hand has been up.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see that.
I just wanted to ask about the deal package that you talked about at the beginning of the examples. So
Sorry, come again, please.
I just wanted to ask about the deal package. That's the package for making HTTP requests that you talked about. So you didn't mention anything. We just use the basic what's it now? The basic package to do our get request. You didn't mention anything about deal here. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, okay. The thing is, they are both the same thing. Instant. The most important thing you should notice sorry about sorry, a minute, please. Okay, so you should note the concept and the idea, not the tools. Okay. You should know the concepts and the idea, not the tools. Dio also has get, post, put, patch, delete. It may have different implementations of it, but in the end, it still does the same thing. Okay, so, but I have an example of Dio here, and I'll show you that quickly. And you can see that it even has the same interfaces. Okay, so well, let's continue with HTTP for now. Okay, so for HTTP, wonderful. So you can see now, look at the signature of this HTTP method. Can you see where I'm highlighting anyone? Can anyone see where I'm highlighting? If you can, please give me a thumbs up. Okay, so no one is responding. Confirm you can hear me, please. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Hello?
Okay. Oh, I asked for feedback. Always provide feedback. That's how I know you're still with me, okay? Okay, so please confirm you can see what I'm highlighting here. My
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
good.
Yes,
So
I see, sir.
to explain the distinction between get and post, you can see this method, the signature of this method, it has a body parameter. Okay, remember I said the structure of a request or response must have headers, must have bodies, and you can see that in the signature of this method. This post method takes headers, takes bodies, and of course the URL, which is the endpoint you want to call. And I talked about encoding. Forget that this thing is most times in other packages, the encoding is put inside the headers. But you might want some packages like HTTP might want to make it much more obvious. So that's why this encoding is here. I explained the encoding. I say we have application/JSON, we have form data, etc. This is where you specify it. So when you're calling the post method, you pass in the URL, give your headers, and this is where you pass the body. For instance, a use case where a user wants to make a social media post. They construct the post in the application. You give them a form. Well, let me even use a simple like sign up. You guys implemented a simple sign up, a dummy sign up actually in your first task, in your most recent task. Okay, so that was a dummy. There was no network call in that thing. You just simulated the 3 second delay. But ideally, in real world, that 3 seconds delay is where you'll be implementing your network call. Okay, so you guys collected email and password. So if I were to implement such thing now, this is how it would look like. If I were to implement a real world sign-in, this is what it would look like. Please excuse the endpoint here. Okay. Straight this. You collected email and password. Okay. So you need to give that email and password to the server to authenticate the user. Okay. And the server is going to give us response whether the if the email and password is correct, it's going to give us something that uniquely identifies us, the server. Most times we call it access to taking older implementations, they are called sessions. Okay. But in more modern implementations, you use JWT tokens. So when we send it email and password to the server is going to give us a JWT token that we can save somewhere. Okay. So how to do that is you give it the body parameter. Sorry, wrong body. Email password. Okay. This is an example of a real world implementation of an API code to sign up. Now you can see what I'm doing here, right? Is I'm giving a map which has fields, email, and password. Because you know how maps work. When you pass the key, you must pass the value, right? But I'm not giving it a raw map. I'm parsing the data, I'm encoding it, I'm serializing it so that it can be sent over the network. That is why it is wrapped inside this JSON encode. Okay, so that's the JSON encode. Remember when we got data from the network, we had JSON decode. Okay, but now when we want to send data to the network, to the server or to some remote machine, we use JSON encode for this HTTP package that we're using, right? In DO, it's slightly different. You don't have to use JSON encode and JSON decode. DO kind of does it internally without you knowing. It just handles that internally for you. Okay. Yes, DO is friendly that way. But with HTTP, you can see you have to encode it before you send it over the network. Now, I'm sending this thing that has email and password because the endpoint I'm sending this to is, and again, excuse me, we don't have any backend that we need to sign into now. But this could be viewing even our certified application has a backend built for us. The sign up endpoint might look something like this. If you can see this URL. Anyone? So the sign up endpoint can look something like this, right? And we want to call it with email and password. Now, if the sign up endpoint has the bodies is expecting a body schema that is different, maybe it's expecting something like user new user email and user password. Maybe this is the schema that this endpoint is requesting, and we give it email and password. It's going to give us an error, going to throw us an error. And again, that is why code documentation, backend documentation is very, very, very important. Okay, without documentation, it's as if you are coding blindly. You don't know what the server expects. So, but you must know what the server expects for it to make network calls, unless it will. So always note that. So for the case of our example, for the purpose of our example, we assume that this endpoint expects email and password for signing. So pass it to it here. And we expect that if everything goes well, okay, it should give us an access token that we can save somewhere. Maybe save it in our user's device so that we can use it and authenticate future requests. So here, what I'll do is I will check if response or status code equal to 200. Else, throw an exception. Maybe the question might be email or password incorrect. Because I need to await this because it's an asynchronous method. I need to await this. Okay, so you can see here, I'm checking. If the status code means 200, means that our signing was successful. The user entered their correct email and their correct password. Therefore, the server is going to give us a token. See, therefore, and I know where that token is going to be. So I want to parse that token. And again, don't forget JSON. First of all, get data. JSON decode. Give it the response body. Okay. And talking about schemas again, maybe this schema response. We have the token here. Look at what I'm highlighting there. This will be your schema response, right? So we want to extract that token and return it from its function. So this is what we do. Return data to string. Now, with this, our signing is complete. Okay, so now let's quickly go over what is going on here. To demonstrate the post HTTP requests, okay, we have the endpoint, of course, the URL that you want to call. So, and the endpoint is expecting post method and expecting a schema that has a JSON schema that has email and password. So that's what I'm giving it to. So I collect the email and password here, these parameters up here, and I insert it into this map-like JSON data structure, and I encode it so that it can be transported over the network. Okay, so it will give me a response when everything is said and done. When the server is done with everything it's doing, it's going to give me a response, and that response is the variable called final response, right? So I want to check if the response to status code is 200, because I know that if the response to status code is 200, then that means that what I wanted to do is successful, and I have a token. So if I don't put this check, I may be looking for token, but token is absent. So you can see if it is not 200, I'm putting an exception. So this exception in a real world application is going to be displayed maybe as a modal, a pop-up, or a snack bar, or a sheet that says password incorrect. So I know most of you try to sign up into applications, you enter your wrong password, and you get something that tells you password incorrect, or maybe email does not exist. This is where that happens. Yeah, right. Okay. So, but when it gives me the token, go ahead. Ngozi, go ahead. Ngozi, if you are speaking, you're on mute. Can
Okay, I
anyone
think
else hear
this
me,
was
please?
fluctuating. So I wanted to ask about this token. I don't really understand where it's coming from.
Okay. Okay. Again, apologies for these examples. Most of them are abstracts. I'm not going to run actually because endpoint is not a real world endpoint, right? But this just to demonstrate what is obtainable. Okay. So I will explain how signing works from a developer perspective, from a code perspective, right? You a signing application in your previous task, right? But it was simulated one. There was no actual logic that does signing. But if it was to be a real world application, this is how signing works, right? You collect the user's email and password. You call an endpoint on the backend. You call the backend. The backend is going to check the user's email, maybe in the database, check their password, check if the password matches what the user signed up with. If the password matches, then it's not going to say, okay, this is the user. It will not give us a token. A token, basically, let me just call it an access token. That token is what is going to identify us to the server the next time we want to make a request. That means we are signed in. The server knows who we are. Okay. Do you understand this thing I just explained now, Ngozi?
All right. Okay. I think I do.
Oh, so that is how signing works, right? So I'm trying to demonstrate an example here. So in this example, I parse this email and password to the server located at certify.code.camp, and the endpoint is at /signup. Okay. So after the server does whatever it does, checks if the user exists, if the email is valid, if the user has signed up, yada, 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 for backend developers. That's not our business. What we care about is the response it gives us. So hopefully, if it is successful, the server should give us an access token. And that access token is what we want to see. This is where that logic happens. So the server gives us a response here. Here we check if the status code is 200. If it is 200, we parse. Remember, I emphasized on parse. We parse the response. Okay, that's what JSON.the code does. And we extract a token. We know how to, I'm sure we know how to index maps and dictionaries. If something in the dictionary, if you want to get the value from it, you pass the key dictionary and it gives you the value. Okay, so that's simply what we are doing here. That's because we know that when it's decoded, it's going to give us a map. I'm sorry, I'm calling it dictionary. In Python, it's called Python a lot, but in Dart, it's called a map. Okay, so JSON that decodes converts this thing to a map, and we index the map to get a token. Okay, and we return it from this function. So whenever we call a signing function, we're always going to get access token if everything goes well. So from here, you can use the access token and do another thing you want to do. This is basically how a signing works. And I'm using it to demonstrate the http.post request. Okay, so I hope that is clear enough now. Okay. Thank you, David. That's clear. So that's the end of http.post request. Okay. Now, beginning of the class, I mentioned headers and encoding. So if you want, by default, you can see that I did not pass any encoding configuration here to this request I made, because by default, it is set to application/JSON, because what we are sending and receiving is JSON data. And most likely what you'll be sending and using is JSON data, right? But I'll just explain the others. For instance, in a web application, or in a actually, website actually uses the HTTP protocol, right? But it doesn't send and receive JSON data. What it uses is XML. So basically, when you enter URL in your browser, okay, your browser is going to use the HTTP protocol and call that endpoint. And that endpoint is going to give it HTML data. And that HTML data is going to be parsed by your browser and displayed. That's how that one works. Okay, on that day, you don't see it happening, but because with the developer now, you'll be seeing it happen because you're working with it. So that's for XML. To do that, to pass encoding, you do this in your headers. Okay. Content type application/JSON. This means that your data that you send will be encoded as JSON data. If I pass something else like XSS dot URL form encoded, I think this is how it is, right? Yes, it's going to encode the data as something else. And if the server is not expecting URL form encoded data, your request is going to fail. So you must always match what the server is expecting when making network requests. You must always match what the server is expecting when making network request. It matters a lot. Okay. By default, it sets application/JSON, and most endpoints, what they use is application/JSON. So we are covered on that. Okay. So I'll quickly move over to DO. The example will be DO, just to demonstrate the difference, and then that'll be the end of the class. So if you have any questions related to it, please let me know now. Okay. Any questions, anyone?
Okay, sir. Sorry, please. You said, what do we use for update? It's patch, right?
Use put and patch update. Okay, put and patch for updating. You pass the body, your request body, as JSON most times, and you call the http.put. This HTTP package has put and patch methods here. So you can see it has http.put. So can you see this, Ginika?
Yes, sir. I can.
Hello. Okay, good. You can see it has post put. So we just has it. Okay. So that's that. Dio. It's not DIOR, it's just DIO. My personal favorite, because it just makes things a lot easier. You just have to focus on your business logic. So this is an example of making a network request with DO. Okay. Oh, please confirm you can see my screen. This fetch products with DO example.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay, wonderful. Okay, wonderful. So you can see that I mentioned earlier that DO kind of serializes and deserializes. Sorry, this is a bit of a tongue twister. Serializes and deserializes. Okay, under the hood. You don't have to explicitly call JSON encode and JSON decode like I was doing with the HTTP package. Sorry, is someone talking? Okay. So DO serializes and deserializes. It parses under the hood. You don't have to explicitly parse using JSON decode. And that's why I love DO so much, because I can't overemphasize the amount of errors that can come out when you forget to parse. You'll be thinking what's going wrong. You don't know that because you're forgetting to parse something somewhere. So DO does that for us, okay? So we can see when I run this example, it's going to do the same thing that our HTTP was doing. So let me quickly run this example right now. Wait, fetch products with DO. Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. So you can see it does the same thing that HTTP package does, right? It gives us the data we are looking for, print it out of the console. Okay, but with DO it's slightly different. You have to instantiate a DO client, okay, and then use the client to do many things. And this is especially very, very important. For instance, you may want to save something inside the DO client itself. It takes options. For instance, you could pass things like some configuration options like validate status, right? This validate status is a status that is a closure that checks the status. For instance, I want to say if the status is not 200, for every request that happens with this DO client, I want it to fail. So if you use this, if you configure this like this, then any call do.get, do.post is going to act accordingly. For instance, I see status is an integer. Let me just demonstrate the use case, right? Let's see if status equal to 400. Okay. Now this validate status takes integer, checks it, and returns a boolean. If it returns, that means the request will be successful. If it returns false, that means to throw an exception. So because the status that is going to be returning here is 200, but here I'm saying status equal to 400. When I run this code, it's going to throw an error. Let me quickly run that to show you how it works. This code should give us an error. Okay, wonderful. So you can see the error it gave us here. It says DO error because the blah 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 yada 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 was thrown because response has a status code of 200. But we are saying only request of status code 400 should pass, should succeed. Well, this is just one of the things DO helps us do. You can set other configuration options, can set many other things, of course, response type, request type, yada yada yada. This is what DO helps us do. And I say DO is a little bit more advanced, offers you more features than HTTP package. So it all depends on your use case. If you just need simple network calls, you can use the HTTP package, it suffices. But if you need more advanced implementations of networking, you may want to check out DO. Okay. So that brings us to the end of this class, guys. Do you have any questions for me, everyone?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, please ask a question.
Okay. Like you are giving us the option HTTP and view. I don't know for others, but for me, I may not look at it immediately. Is this
Sorry, I
for?
can't hear you. Can you speak up a bit?
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, maybe come closer to your mic or increase your volume.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm saying that you've given us two options, HTTP and Geo.
Yeah.
And is it compulsory that like we must use the Geo, because he didn't go into it fully and we are supposed to go and read the documentation. I'm asking because you know that by Friday, because you said you are done with HTTP request, by Friday now you enter something new. And what you explained extensively on is HTTP package. Can we just continue using that HTTP package until maybe in the course of the end of all our lecture, if we want, we can now go, because I think Dio, with what you explained, I should look at it since it's more, as in more flexible. So are you giving us that option? Like if you give us a task now, is it compulsory we implement Dio, or we should use any one of our choice? Because to me, I feel like there's no
No.
time. Next Friday now, you
If
give something else.
if you see a task, right? I try not to focus on the tool. I try to give you options to use a tool of your choice. My job, like I said earlier, is to show you what is available, how you can use them. Okay. Your job is to find out how you apply them, right? DO and HTTP, I've explained this for networking, right? It's simpler. DO is much more complex. I wouldn't say complex, but it offers you much more features and capabilities, right? So, but in your task, what you'll be seeing is implement a mock HTTP call to this and that, display the data in your Flutter application or blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't specify the package to use, okay? But because you understand the concepts I've explained, the concepts of HTTP get, post, put, patch, you'll be able to use any of the packages or tools available to you to solve that problem. Does that make sense, Inika?
Yes, yes, it does. And I have another question, but not on this topic anyway.
Please go ahead.
Okay, it's based on the Firebase. I want to know because when I've not used it before and I went to check how to use it, I saw tons of initialization. I want to know, will you put us through on those initialization, like first time initialization, like beginner
Yes, that's what we'll do
something?
in our next class. You can see this is certified application. I've set it up. Here you have Firebase setup where I've already set up the. Can you hear me? Can
Yes,
anyone
I
hear
can
me,
hear
please?
you.
Okay,
Yeah, I
so
can hear you.
I've already set up the Firebase and everything for the certified application, and I've actually written a lot of code around it, right? But in our next class, we're looking at Firebase navigation. I think that's our next.
Okay,
That's the
so
next
you'll
thing on
be
our
putting us
curriculum.
through the setup, right?
Yes, I'll be explaining everything long. So you'll be seeing it, and please, in our next class, we are going to start properly building Certify. Okay. Also, maybe try and join with your system or laptop so you can kind of try out the examples that we'll be
All
sharing or
right.
looking at.
Thank you very much.
So if that's all, does anyone else have any
Okay.
question for me?
Yes, sorry. One more. I just remembered. I saw
Go
that we have
ahead.
eight tasks in total. And I want to know, is it every week that we get a task? I just want to, because I saw the curriculum is 12 weeks, but I'm seeing 8 stages or something. So do we get a task every week?
Sorry, come again.
I saw that the curriculum is 12 weeks and I'm seeing 8 stages. That means 8 tasks. So I'm wondering, do we get a task every week? I'm just asking, please.
Yes, you're supposed to get a task every week, and your tasks will drop today. Oh, that's your stage 2 task. So yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining. I think if there's no other question, we'll call it a day. Have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I don't know why it's giving me option of whether I can end the recording or it's like maybe
Yes,
the
yes,
whole.
please. Yes,
So what
please do
should I
that.
do? Okay.
Yes, end the recording.
Mhm.